What have we accomplished for the American people? Virtually nothing.
That's them talking about themselves. According to the congressional records, this Congress is on track to be one of the most unproductive sessions in modern history. We have a bunch of people up there to solve problems that aren't interested in solving the problems. What would happen if, in some way, all of those people could only be there for a while and then they had to go home and live with the laws they passed or didn't pass?
I think this place is dysfunctional. If instead of having decorum, instead of operating in a professional manner, this place has just evolved into this bickering and nonsense and not really doing the job for the American people.
Well, that was former Congressman Ken Buck, a Republican from Colorado who made national headlines when he recently resigned from Congress before the end of his term because he says it became so dysfunctional. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
You've been inside that system, and it was frustrating for you.
Very frustrating, yeah. At the same time, we have major issues that we've got to address. We are, one, lying to the American public about very serious issues, and two, we are ignoring the job that we were sent there to do by the American people. And when I say lying, the election wasn't stolen. And as Republicans, we lie. The people who rioted in the Capitol building are criminals, and they're not political prisoners. The Democrats on their side do many of the same things, but I can't go to the American public and say, we've got a serious problem with Social Security. It is going to be bankrupt in a few years. We've got a problem with Medicare. We've got a problem with the spending, the $34 trillion of debt. I can't go to America and say, we've got to solve these problems and we all are going to suffer as a result of what we've done in the past if we continue to lie.
Why is that? I look at this and it seems to me that we have a bunch of people up there to solve problems that aren't interested in solving the problems. Is that true?
Yes.
How did we get to this place?
We're sending the wrong people to Congress, and the wrong people are attracted to politics right now. We need to change the process. We need to change the people, and we will end up with better policies. People now get elected in a strong Republican district or a strong Democrat district with 32, 34% of the primary vote. They then are running in a general election, and because it's such a overwhelming Republican or Democrat district, they get elected. Now people are so interested in their social media accounts, they're so interested in their own popularity that they've given up on solving the problems that America sent us there to solve.
Well, what the hell? I don't know enough about politics to discuss politics. I think most people that talk about politics don't know enough about it. I just am willing to admit it. But what would happen if, in some way, all of those people could only be there for a while and then they had to go home and live with the laws they passed or didn't pass? Would that help?
Yes. The incentive structure in Congress is wrong. In my mind, something radical needs to happen. And term limits is part of the answer. But the other part of the answer is, what if we didn't balance a budget, you couldn't run for re-election? What if we set up an incentive structure that instead of I make more money fundraising or I make more money because I have a bigger social media account, we set up a structure that you have to solve some of these problems. Immigration is one of them. Certainly spending is one of them. But if you don't solve those, you can't run for re-election. In addition to, you can only serve 10 years, 12 years, whatever term limits we put on people.
Part of the problem is they're trying to pass too many laws, and they need to go back and fix the problems that they have instead of just trying to put Band-Aids on it.
When they do legislate, it appears to be helping out their buddies on K Street, not the average citizen. I would rather my senators and my congressmen probably stand on their principles versus just constantly, capitulating to get along.
Well, those were two of our fellow Americans sharing their thoughts on Congress, and they're not alone. According to a recent Gallup poll, only 13% of Americans approve of the job Congress is doing. Now, that's the question we're asking tonight. Is Congress doing its job? Well, I think everybody would agree that's not true. Dr. Philip Wallach is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and author of the book, Why Congress? He says Congress has lost its way. And joining us virtually from the Capitol tonight is Representative Eric Swalwell, a Democrat from California, who called Congress a word, well, I can't say it on TV, but I certainly didn't argue with it when I heard it. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell me what you think's not working.
Well, most Americans know what needs to be done when it comes to border security, when it comes to...
We're having a little trouble hearing the congressman. Can we fix that?
Congress doesn't work and the audio Congress doesn't work.
Yeah. We'll reconnect. They said he had to run to vote. On what? Cheap shot, cheap shot. Ken Buck is saying this doesn't work. Congressman Swalwell saying it doesn't work. Why is it not working?
Well, I think you've got the cause already out there. They're legislators. Their job is to legislate, but a lot of them think their job is just to be public figures at large, to just sort of comment on the affairs of the day and get famous doing so.
Is this an ego thing? Has the internet changed things so much that people are just interested in what kind of following they have, how popular they are, and is it all about getting reelected?
The media landscape changing has made a huge difference. The way a congressman used to operate, being seen in their local constituency was everything, and being connected to their community. It's much easier now to connect with a national audience, to fundraise nationally, and that does change the incentives for members of Congress.
Yeah. So what would our founding fathers think of Congress as it functions today? This can't be what was conceived.
I think they'd be really surprised at how much Congress is willing to abdicate its power to the executive branch especially. They actually worried that Congress would be too powerful. Today, members of Congress are experts at shirking responsibility, saying it's someone else's problem, it's not my fault.
Well, I was talking about this earlier today. The comment was made that, Congress, the legislature, may not be enacting a lot of laws, but that's partially because they're pushing a lot of this off to agencies who are enacting an awful lot of regulations. They don't call them laws, they call them regulations, but nonetheless, they're enacting a lot of things we have to live with. Is that happening?
It happens all the time, and it's a very simple reason for it, and that is that if you're in Congress, you don't want to make tough decisions. Because you make tough decisions, someone's going to use that against you in a commercial when you run for re-election. It's much easier to say, let the administrative state run that, and they don't run it well. They're not accountable. The bureaucrats don't get elected. We get elected, and we should be able to stand in front of the American people and explain why we took a certain vote.
So if you push this off to the EPA or the Department of Transportation or some appointed official and let them do the dirty work, then you don't have to live with it.
That's right.
Now, my idea of compromise has always been that we sit down and come up with something that all sides can live with. But it seems to me that on Capitol Hill, the idea of compromise instead is, I'll give you everything you want, you give me everything I want, we'll load this up with all of this stuff that's important to you and your state, important to me and my state, important to you and your state, and then we'll pass it. That doesn't seem to me like compromise. That seems to me like a lot of back office back scratching. And that's the reason we're $34 trillion in debt. There's no compromise there. It's just everybody pays everybody off with what's important to them to get reelected. That doesn't seem like compromise to me. That doesn't seem like negotiation. Is that what's happening?
Absolutely. The appropriations process happens through addition, not subtraction. So if I want a bridge and you want a reservoir, you get your reservoir, I get my bridge, and we both vote for the appropriations bill. If you care about the American people, you vote for less spending, you don't get anything.
All right, but respectfully, that's not why we have the $34 trillion in debt.
Why do we have it?
I mean, the main drivers are our entitlement spending, our Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. If we want to think about how to fix our problem, we can't just look at the appropriations process only covers a third of federal spending these days. So part of the problem is that we fight over, there are some members, including Congressman Buck, who rail against the appropriations process and say we need to spend less on it. That might be right, but it's not going to fix the problem. It's just a small part of it.
But the political problem, you can't go to the American people and say, we're going to fix Social Security because you're going to get less money, without first demonstrating that we did everything we could to cut the Department of Defense budget, to cut the budget of human services and others. We have to do our job and then go to the American public and say, we've done everything we can to cut this side of the budget. Now we've got to work on Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid.
At this hour, the federal government is needlessly shut down because of Senate Democrats.
It is a joke when Republicans say that they have urgency around this bill.
Disregard totally what you're hearing from the other side. They are grasping at straws, making excuses, and telling flat-out lies.
Here's my question. It seems to me, if I've worked all of my life and I've saved up and I've got it socked away in 401ks and all the things that you put those funds in, and then the government says, well, we need some more money, so they just print some more money. Doesn't that make the money we have worth a lot less?
No, you're absolutely right.
Inflation is the problem, not fiat currency, we call it, right? We don't have a gold standard anymore.
Don't you have inflation because you're printing more money, in part?
Yes, indeed. But we had a long period where we had very little inflation in this country, right? We all got pretty comfortable with that. Congress, unfortunately, took the message that it could spend without any kind of restraint, and there wouldn't be any inflation. That was the lesson they learned in the 2010s. Unfortunately, now in the 2020s, we're finding out that there are limits. There are limits to how big of the deficits you can run, and COVID did all kinds of crazy stuff to our supply chains, and we got a new episode of inflation.
COVID didn't do it. It's a mismanagement of COVID that did it. Right?
Well,
we didn't have to shut the economy down. We just did.
Well, the part that actually caused the inflation was dumping huge buckets of money.
Yeah, $5.5 trillion into the economy, $4.4 trillion of which went into savings and checking accounts, which means it wasn't necessary.
Well,
tell me I'm wrong.
We were desperate to stave off a bad recession, and our policymakers thought it was better to err on the side of doing too much than doing too little.
Who's we?
Some of our policymakers.
That's what I'm saying.
Some of us didn't vote for that money.
Large bipartisan majorities that did not include Congressman Buck. I think that they overshot for sure.
And I'm not blaming you for all this personally, although it may sound like it. It's all your fault. No, I'm saying, who is we? Who decided that it's time to spend $5.5 trillion?
That's a great question. So if you go back to
did the American people have a vote on that?
March and April of 2020 were a remarkable bipartisan time where you got the leaders of both parties. They came together, they made a deal in a back room and said, this is how we're going to get these trillions of dollars out the door, and they did it in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And you could say they made the wrong choice. On the other hand, it's good that our system can respond quickly when there is a crisis. But there was remarkably little deliberation on what that money was actually going to do.
Yeah, it was, I think, April 2020. I went on the air and said, this is a huge mistake. And everybody said I was insane.
Heartless.
Yeah. I'm still sitting on the curb waiting for somebody to stop by and say, hey, sorry, we called you crazy for that.
The one thing that I would wish for personally is that Congress would act on border security.
I wish Congress would pass a law on term limits.
Well, I've been saying for years that I think the debt is a real problem, but I think we might have passed the point where that can be resolved.
I think a law needs to be passed that makes them more transparent.
Look, this is a wake-up call for anybody watching to know who they are voting for. Sometimes it does get ugly when you do unpopular things, and you've experienced that, right?
I have, yeah. I was a prosecutor for 25 years. I had my share of death threats at that time. Nothing like serving in Congress for over 9 years. And it's all the really what I call the stupid votes, the votes that are never going to change Americans' lives. They're just messaging bills that people get worked up about because there are so many special interest groups that pour money into social media, start the phone call operations going, and then people get so wound up that they start making the death threats.
What's caused the phones to light up?
Americans are frustrated, and that frustration comes to a head when there's a vote on the floor in Congress. And so they take that frustration that has been building up for months and they focus it on a member of Congress, and sometimes they say stupid things.
Yeah. George Santos was going to be here today. Y'all may know he's the gentleman that got expelled he lost his job. He called in sick. Maybe he's sick, but he was found to have defrauded everybody, right, about everything. How did he ever get that far in the process? How did he ever get elected and sworn in?
Well, it was a strange turn of events, let's say. He was the Republican candidate in a very blue district that then all of a sudden, because a New York State court threw out their districting maps, became a pretty competitive seat, and the incumbent had retired. So he ran in 2020 and lost, and then in 2022, he sort of was hanging around, ready to run again, probably to lose again, but that thing with the maps happened and gave him a shot, and he won. So he really didn't get vetted by the local Republicans from Long Island, to say the least. But it is amazing, again, that somebody can come to Congress because they're good at being a reply guy on social media, not because they have deep roots in their community.
But you say he's not a one-off, that there are others just like him.
There's at least a dozen, 20 members of Congress that if you looked carefully, you would find that their background in the story that they told the voters when they first ran for office is more lies than truth.
Really?